This podcast is intended for an adult audience. Please be aware that some of the content discussed may be triggering. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Reach Out, the podcast, where we are dedicated to ending sexual violence through advocacy, counseling, education, and more. This is the official podcast of Reach Counseling, located in Northeast Wisconsin. You will learn more about the services we provide and hear from members of our team, sexual assault survivors, and the people who support them. We are so glad you're joining us today and would love to connect with you further. You can find out more about us by going to reachcounseling.com. The interview portion of this episode was recorded in May of 2023. Please keep this in mind when dates and timelines are referenced. Today is Tuesday, November 28th, which is also known as Giving Tuesday 2023. Would you consider a donation to Reach Counseling to help us in our work? We envision a socially just community that prioritizes and empowers healing for all impacted by sexual violence. You can show your support today by going to reachcounseling.com/donations. Thank you so much to anyone who contributes on this special day. This week's episode features an interview with Tim Smith, clinical therapist at Reach Counseling. Tim talks about his educational journey to become a licensed clinical social worker. He also shares about his therapy work with individuals in the sex offender treatment program. Here is episode 4. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm curious, what is your journey with Reach? How long have you been with Reach? What do you spend the bulk of your time here doing? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I started out here actually as an intern in 2018. I was doing my social work practicum and I specialized in mental health clinical counseling or therapy at UW Oshkosh social work program for the master's. And I have always worked with some kind of population that has been in trouble, specifically, the legal system. My bachelor's was in criminal justice, and that's the route that I thought I wanted to go. Got out with my bachelor's degree, worked at the sheriff's department for 6 months. Found out it was not for me. So I went back to school, got my master's in social work. Long story short, I was approached for my practicum by, I think it was Mary Whedon, one of my professors, and she was telling me about the internship at Reach going into Oshkosh Correctional and doing sex offender treatment.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like, that sounds super interesting. Yeah, I would love to do
actually
that.
Going in.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I got the counseling aspect, but that correctional background too, getting to go into the prison, I was like, this is pretty cool, getting to go in and actually seeing the inner workings of the correctional system, but also getting to go in and actually helping clients, people that are going to be getting out of prison soon, and just making sure that they have the treatment they need to succeed.
Yeah.
And I started with doing the internship, and it turned into a full-time job or a full-time career when I graduated, which was amazing.
Yeah, that's not always the case for people. So
it's not.
The stars definitely aligned for that.
I'm very lucky.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, because I didn't know that you were actually going into the prison initially. That must have given you a really unique perspective into what your clientele were dealing with or were coming from. Can you speak to that? Or
Yeah. Absolutely. I have some previous experience when I was in grad school working with clients who were on sex offender status, and so I kind of knew the community correction side with probation and parole and how all of that works. But actually going into the prison and working with prisoners, and they were our clients at that time that were going to be coming out of prison, some of them within, I think, 3 months of us finishing that treatment group up. I was really able to see how far along some of the guys were versus some of the other guys. I would say 85% of the people in the group were very open about their offenses and what they did. All of them were hands-on offenses. It's interesting to me because everybody that was in that group, their victim was somebody that was close to them.
Right.
Which I heard that in school all the time. You don't have to necessarily worry about some stranger doing something to you or your children. It's people that you know.
And when you say in school, you're talking about like in your program.
In my
in
program,
college,
yes,
not
correct.
like when you were younger.
No,
Because
well,
when we were younger, people are like, "Oh, don't take candy from the man in the van
exactly.
and the stranger that approaches you in the park." But
Yeah.
really, as studies have found, that's not often the perpetrator. I mean, it can be, but that's not often.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It can happen. But yeah, unfortunately, it's people that are close to the family. So family, friends, uncles, fathers, brothers. It's grandfathers. It's scary to think. People that you love and trust. You leave your children with them, and something like that could happen.
Yeah.
But going back to the original question, the dynamics are just different because the people that are in those groups, you could really see how far along some of them were versus others. And it was interesting to see those who took accountability for their crimes and the offenses versus those who didn't. And those who you saw were not ready. And those are the people that I would say are more high risk when they come out.
Right. Because they're not accepting the responsibility.
Correct.
Of what happened.
The big thing that I really hate in society is the stigma that people who commit sex offenses have, that they're all pedophiles and they're never going to get better, treatment doesn't work, they should just be locked up and the key thrown away, and that's not true. And honestly, this is the population of people that need treatment to make sure that they don't do this again in the future.
Right.
In my work, I would say 95% of the people that I work with that have committed sex offenses were victims of sexual abuse themselves.
Wow, that's a very high number.
Yeah, and we're starting to do more work now with juveniles who are sexually acting out to prevent them from eventually, offending as an adult. But yeah, there's so much trauma wrapped up, and the majority of society really doesn't understand that there's more complex issues that go into this, and it's not as simple as we should just lock these people away and they never see the light of day again.
Right. So you work with families too, right? With the juvenile offenders or that are acting out like you were saying. What's kind of a common theme that comes up with the family members, or that are, as they're processing what their child or family member has done, or what they're worried about they're going to do once they're an adult, and then have to go through the justice system for? What's kind of something that comes up a lot?
So I see two things mainly. So we have, this is a kind of a lingo within the TFCBT, the trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy that we do with children, but the idea of a green light versus a red light parent. So obviously green light means they're very supportive and proactive and trying to help their child out and being really just a supportive individual for their child, to where we also have red light parents too that seem kind of distant, that seem that specifically with these situations with kids sexually acting out, they bring them here and it's like, oh, well, it's just kids being kids, boys being boys, it's really not that big of a deal. I don't believe that what was said actually happened. So there's a lot of enabling, a lot of justifying, minimizing. But then you get those parents that come in and they're like, yeah, my child really made a really horrible choice. And yeah, we just want them to get the help to, keep themselves out of prison and ultimately hurting someone else in the future.
Wow,
and healing from their own pain.
Yeah, so. That's really good that you have those green light parents. How do you help the red light parents?
Well, that's a
That's a loaded question, I know.
That is a very loaded question. Unfortunately, a lot of times what I have seen anyway is, and maybe this is just the because I do work with juveniles, but I don't have a huge caseload of them. But what I have seen on my caseload is a lot of times you can't really do a whole lot.
They're very set.
They're very set in their ways. And again, maybe that's just because of the short or the small sample that I've worked with. But yeah, it's like if they're really believing that their child was set up, or it's not totally what the victim said happened, yeah, it really seems like the parents get stuck in that. And rightfully so. They don't want to believe that their child did anything wrong like that.
Yeah, nobody wants to think that of their child.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think parents really need to be open-minded about that and really try to help their child out, because if, that really did happen, which is why they're here, chances are if they don't get the help for it, the correlation is there that their chances of offending as an adult does increase.
Or maybe even just discovering that their child had something happen to them and they just haven't disclosed that, or didn't even realize, maybe they, in that trauma brain, kind of suppressed that memory or something,
Correct.
I would imagine that would be some things that come out of it too, or could come out of it.
Absolutely.
So as a parent yourself,
mm-hmm.
and I'm a parent too,
yep.
What are things that we can do to protect our kids or to empower our kids so that they're not hopefully going to become a victim of grooming? What's age appropriate steps that can be taken to help our kids and protect our kids?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I really teach my child, she'll be 6 in July, so by the time this is actually out, she'll be 6. But one thing that my wife is a teacher, so we're really good with how we talk with our child and explain to them or to her how you have to be careful when it comes to being around other people, and especially adults that seem trusting. 90% of the time, almost 99% of the time, I would say, yeah, I mean, it's safe to be around adults.
Yeah.
However, we also know that the trauma there, kind of like I was talking before, that's likely where a child is going to become sexually abused. So one thing that we have taught our daughter is that we don't keep secrets.
Very good.
So the only time we tell her she can keep a secret when it comes to adults is if somebody tells her like about a party or something like that.
Party.
A surprise party or something that is very, it's very blatant that it's not something that's uncomfortable, I guess, for lack of a better word, but anything to where an adult's like, well, let's keep this between us, or
big red flag there.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, big red flag. So it's just, we don't keep secrets.
Right.
Another thing that we have taught her, and I encourage all parents out there, penis and vagina are not bad words.
Exactly.
I mean, and I grew up in a family to where those were bad words. You didn't say those words.
Right.
For whatever reason.
Yeah.
But they're okay words to use, and it's good for them to have the words to use for body autonomy to express if something has happened. You know, so-and-so touched me on my vagina. So-and-so touched me on my butt. So-and-so touched my penis, Right. So there isn't any confusion of, if you use a word like cookie for a vagina, oh, so-and-so touched my cookie. Oh, okay, well, yeah. Well, tell them to stop, we'll get another cookie, So, and that can cause problems because a child is trying to express that.
Right.
And adults don't understand what exactly they're talking about.
And I've heard about that before, where even from other parents in forums that I belong to and stuff, where they're like, I had no idea, and my poor child was trying to tell me that they were being abused, and I thought they were talking about a cookie, literally a cookie at the class party, or and so that's a good way to equip using the anatomically correct terms and things. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about your background and why you wanted to get into this line of work?
So mental health has always been something important to me. I will just say, I'm not going to go into everything, but I had some pretty significant mental health issues as a child, and counseling was really what got me through some of the hard issues that I struggled with when I was a kid and a teenager. It's always been something that's been pretty near and dear to me. Even when I was an undergrad, going for the criminal justice degree, there was a time where I thought about therapy. My best friend and I were actually going to go to Whitewater together. We both got into the counseling program there.
Okay.
Long story short, I decided not to go at that time, to take the job at the sheriff's department. I truly do believe that there's a purpose for everything that you go through in life, and there was a purpose for that for me. But I'm happy where I'm at, and I'm happy that I made that decision to go back to school. And personally, nothing against counselors, LPCs, but I'm happy that I went the social work route.
Yeah. Just
because of the social justice aspect. Mm-hmm. Really, there's nothing wrong with either degree.
Yeah.
Counselors are kick butt people, and social workers are just as much kick butt as well. So
in different ways,
different ways,
strengths. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
what you bring to the table is just a unique perception on different things. So, in your training as a social worker, what did that entail? Like, were you focused mainly on criminal justice type things, or was it studying about like possibly being a county worker for human service or child and human family services? What did that training look like as a social worker?
Well, when I started my master's program, there were classes. I actually had to take a few classes before I could apply to my master's program because with my bachelor's degree, I didn't do social work initially. And there were classes like I had to take economics, which I hated with a passion. An anthropology class, which was awesome, and then another couple sociology classes because my classes mainly focused on the psychological aspect and psychology as well as the criminal justice program. There were some remedial classes. It was called the Foundation program, so it took me an extra year, and anybody else that went into that program, it took them an extra year to graduate. And during that time, you took classes that were technically undergraduate classes taught at a graduate level. So those, and the reason I'm going back into that is those classes were initially a lot of social welfare policy, human behavior in the social environment, just different classes that focus more with social work, not really counseling. About a year into my program, that's where we had to decide mental health counseling, or if you wanted to go the physical health and the the hospital social worker and that type of path. Not what I wanted to do. I give people that work in the hospital a lot of credit. I really wanted to do the mental health therapy, and then when I declared that specialty, that's when a lot of the classes really focused on different type of interventions for therapy, for counseling, teaching me how to identify stuff and probe those questions and ask them, and really try to get down to the root problem of what my client was facing.
Right. What do you like particularly about working at Reach?
One word: culture. It's this is the longest I've been at I don't want to say job because this is my career now. This is the longest that I've been at a company. And I don't have any desire or intentions on leaving.
It's a good feeling.
Yeah, it's good to know. I mean, I genuinely care and enjoy everybody that I work with, and I like everybody that I work with, which is unfortunate when it came to other jobs, especially before I got my degree. There were always people that you butted heads with, or I don't know, for one reason or another, you just didn't get along with. And I'm happy to be in a place to where me and my coworkers have similar outlooks on society, on life, on therapy, on being a human being.
Yeah. And that's not to say that, people don't have various opinions or the occasional disagreement or whatever, but
Absolutely.
The way that you go about working through that is not toxic. It's positive and it's productive. Yeah.
That's a good word. There were a lot of places that I felt were toxic.
Which is crazy because it's like you're supposed to be helping people to get out of toxic thinking and situations and all this, but then you're in a workplace that's toxic, right? So like it's an oxymoron.
Yeah.
Is that the right word?
Yeah. Definitely not to get into the job that I had before here, but really I was staying at that job just because it really helped with my school schedule. There were times that just with the toxic environment, I wanted to get out of there, but glad I stuck it out. It made me more appreciative of what I have now. And I got through it.
That's great. What advice would you give to someone who maybe is just not ready to disclose abuse that they've gone through? What steps can they take to get to a place where they're talking to someone like you or one of the other therapists here or one of the advocates here? What advice would you give to them?
Obviously, you need to feel ready to talk about the traumas that you've experienced. But what the analogy that I always give people is kind of like having the stomach flu. So I get clients that come in and they're like, I want to talk about this, and this, but this I'm okay talking about. But when it comes to this issue of sexual abuse or someone passing away, that grief that also gets wrapped up in the PTSD, I don't want to touch that yet.
Right.
And then I've had clients that get stuck and I've worked with them for a year and they're still not wanting to touch that. And I give that analogy kind of like the stomach flu of I don't know about you, Jessica, but I hate throwing up. And I'll do just about
Yep.
everything in my power to not throw up.
Yep.
But when we do, we feel better.
Exactly.
And it's kind of, think of the trauma as needing to throw up, and you're able to throw up and get that out. And it's like the negative energy that is leaving you,
Right.
which helps you to feel better. But it takes a while to go through that.
Right.
It's not fun. I'm
No.
not going to lie to you. It's not fun. It's scary. It's uncomfortable. It's painful. But that's how we heal.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have to get rid of that pain in order to reabsorb positive energy to continue with life.
Yeah. As you're helping so many people every day process trauma, how do you avoid burnout? How do you take care of yourself?
Well, I am a very spiritual person. It's my spirituality, my relationship with who I say is my God. It's very important to me, and that's how I get through the day. I really focus on meditation before I come into work, even sometimes during the day, just to make sure I'm present with people, and just making sure that I'm mindful to not absorb the negative energies that sometimes come out of clients when
Right.
they're talking to me with the trauma processing. I have taken it home before. It can be easy to do that, but we have to remember as therapists that it's not this might sound a little harsh, but it's not our trauma.
Right.
So if you want to be a therapist, you have to just remember that you cannot take on your clients' traumas.
Right.
Because as crazy as that might sound, that vicarious trauma, that secondary trauma, it's real. I can tell you that for a fact because I've been there.
Yeah.
So it's really just a matter of taking care of yourself and making sure that you have compassion for people and you're not taking that on.
Yeah. Do you ever have people, like, when you get asked what you do for a living, or, that conversation comes up when you meet new people, right? Do you ever get responses that are less than kind when you tell people what you do?
Yeah, they most of them get the trauma therapy because half my client caseload are survivors of trauma. The other half are people who are classified as sex offenders. I hate using that term. Oh, that person's a sex offender. That's not that's not what makes them up.
Right.
To me, they're a human being first that made a horrible decision and a choice to offend, but there's more to them.
So when people maybe react strongly or in a kind of just a really negative opinion of sex offenders, or how do you handle that? Do you use it as an educational opportunity? Does it get you riled up? How do you handle it?
Sometimes I have to really be mindful of how I convey things versus arguing with people.
Right.
It took me a while to realize that arguing with most people, it's counterproductive. It's not going to change anything. Most people are, when it comes to their opinions, they're not very open-minded about other ideas.
Right.
And that's just being a human being. I mean, I'm like that too with things. But yeah, I mean, if there seems to be some curiosity behind it, I'll try to give people some education on the topic. But other times it's more of, oh, well, I can't believe you do that work. That's, those people, and I put that in quotations, they should just be in prison and locked up forever, and they're sick individuals. And, my comment a lot of times to people that say those things, but they're very stuck in their ways, I'll say, well, everybody needs treatment, and personally they can't, whether you think they should be in prison forever or not, they're not going to be, most of them.
Yeah.
And, my job is to help ensure that they don't go back to making those horrible choices.
Your work is needed, and I'm thankful that you do it.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say too is that a lot of people think that when people who are sex offenders get out of prison, that they are at high risk of reoffending, and they need to be housed separately, and people need to worry about their children and worry about the people that committed those offenses. Well, I don't think a lot of people know that when people who are sex offenders are about to be released from prison, they get evaluated.
Okay.
Be it by a psychologist or a social worker, and they get evaluated with their level of risk. And if they are at high risk, they don't get released. They get a civil commitment to, in this state, it would be Sandridge. So they would go to Sandridge, which is a treatment facility for people who have sex offenses.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, and they're deemed a danger still to society, and they will stay in Sandridge and receive extensive treatment until a psychologist or a psychiatrist there determines, hey, this person is now safe to reintegrate into society.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's not just like, okay, well, you're done. Bye. Like,
correct.
They're making sure that this person, or doing everything they can to make sure that this person. And do you feel like that is a pretty good filter?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to say, personally, and I talk with my coworkers about this, I would rather, I think, live next to somebody who's committed a sex offense versus someone who was trafficking drugs or dealing drugs, just because the police in the community are really watching people who have sex offenses, to where someone who was a violent drug offender, they get out of prison, they're on probation, but they're not being supervised like people who've committed sex offenses.
Because I see even in like neighborhood groups on Facebook or whatever, like they'll post like, oh, just so you know, somebody on the registry moved in this address or whatever. So I guess that makes sense what you're saying. Like,
you need to be worried about them. Not really.
Yeah,
not really.
Yeah.
I get it.
Wow. Well, I have another question. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to.
Sure.
But I am curious. When you first started working with sex offenders, and I know you hate that term.
That's
but,
okay.
Just for people to know
Absolutely.
or reference. Did you struggle with finding the humanity? As a dad, do you ever think, oh, if this had happened to my child, or like, did you struggle at first?
I still do at times. I'm human, and quite a few of the clients that I work with now are here for child pornography charges, which if you ever want to do another podcast, I can definitely go into hands-on offenses versus hands-off.
I was going to ask you about that because I remember you mentioned that earlier. Can you really quickly define that?
Yeah, hands-off child porn. That's the big thing right now. Hands-on offenses are obviously when someone has actually molested a child. Can even be an adult, sexual assault, rape. But it's. Sorry, can you go back to the question?
Yeah.
Kind of got myself.
Was it difficult for you when you first started, and you said even now sometimes because you're human?
Yeah.
How do you find the humanity and the empathy for the people that you counsel, even when it's difficult for you to understand why they do what they do?
So I'm not gonna lie. If something happened to my child, I'd be livid.
Yeah.
I would have some very strong opinions about the person who did that to my child, and I would probably, gut reaction would want something, pretty drastic to happen to that person. But the thing is, and I think what makes it the hardest for me, there's not a whole lot that really bothers me when it comes to hearing about some of these stories. But I think what bothers me the most is when we get our referrals for our federal clients, and most of them are here just for child porn only.
Okay.
Some of those referral packets will actually describe what were in those videos.
Oh,
And that is probably one of the hardest aspects of my job, because I need to go through that to kind of determine what that person did. And some of those graphic descriptions, let's just say those stick with you.
I would imagine so. I also cannot imagine being the one that has to field those descriptions. So thank you for being the one to do that.
Well, I mean, can you imagine being the FBI agent that has to actually watch those and like catalog them? And
I can't. That's yeah. Well, I hate to end things on that note.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
But it's a reality of what you do in your line of work, and I'm appreciative that you're sharing about it today. Thank you for everything that you shared today, and we'll talk more in the future, I'm sure.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Every 73 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. You are not alone. Reach Counseling is here to help, and we're expanding our reach. Since 1976, we have offered our services throughout Winnebago County. We are pleased to now offer our services in Outagamie and Calumet counties as well. Reach Counseling is a sexual assault service provider for children and adults that offers culturally responsive outreach, prevention education, victim advocacy, trauma counseling, and sex offender treatment. As an anti-violence agency, we strive to heal lives and transform communities. Call our 24/7 helpline anytime at 920-722-8150. For more information, visit us at reachcounseling.com.